program.
What you talking about?
The program. The program. Get with the program.
Everybody clap to this. Say what?
Get with the program.
It starts now.
Hello and welcome to Get With The Program Radio Show. I'm your host, Gary Jones. Get With The Program Radio Show is a multicultural, informative, relevant, and entertaining one-hour weekly show offering a diverse combination of guest interviews with questions and comments. And we will, as usually, act as a positive source of information. Now today, we will be joined in the studio with Jaymes Powell and Randy Voller. Jaymes is the Vice President of the African American Caucus of North Carolina's Democratic Party, and Randy Voller, the former North Carolina Democratic Chairman and now current leader of the state's Labor Caucus. And our conversation today is the government going too far with politics and sports? And we're going to touch some other issues as well, so don't touch that dial. But right now, before we get started, I got to reach out to my man, comedian Gravedigger. Gravedigger, what you got for me? Talk to me.
Dear, I just got to ask you, do you ever just have somebody in the family that you just don't want to take nowhere because they don't know how to act in that country? We took my brother-in-law out the other night to a Chinese restaurant, right? We all in there ordering French fried rice and chicken fried rice and pork fried rice. He got some chicken fried rice. And after all the food was delivered, he called the waitress over and asked her for a slice of light bread. And she looked at us and actually spoke perfect English, like, get this food out of here. Yeah, that's just how family members is. And I know everybody got somebody like that in their family. But I want to get back to one other thing. Look here. Y'all remember back in the day when there were no black quarterbacks on NFL teams? Now, name me one team that doesn't have a black quarterback that's starting or a black quarterback that's backing up. See how things change, Gary? I just had to bring that up tonight. Be careful who you take out to dinner. Choose your people. Don't take them on things that's going to embarrass you, like Family Feud or something like that. Gary, I got to get out of here, and I want y'all to keep getting with the program with my man, Gary. Gary, I'll see y'all later. Peace.
Man, Grave, I'm telling you, man, that was hot. As usual, you always deliver on time. Boy, you crazy as they come, man. But listen, don't touch that dial, people. We'll be right back after this hot musical selection.
This is how we do it. This is how we do it. Sha-la-la-la-la. Sha-la-la-la-la. This is how we do it. Sha-la-la-la. This is how we do it. It's Friday night and I feel
Hello and welcome back to Get With The Program Radio Show. I'm your host, Gary Jones. And now today, we are joined in the studio with Jaymes Powell and Randy Voller. Jaymes is the Vice President of the African American Caucus of the North Carolina's Democratic Party. And Randy Voller is the former North Carolina Democratic Chairman and current leader of the state's Labor Caucus. Our conversation today is the government going too far with politics and sports and some other things? Once again, hello, Randy and Jaymes. Welcome to Get With The Program Radio Show.
Great to be here, Gary.
Great to be here, Gary.
It's good to be here, man. It's good to be here than to be viewed, right?
That's right.
It's always great to be here with my buddy, Randy Voller.
Yeah, I see you two guys are always busy doing things in the community all the time. Well, so let's just get right down into this thing, man. When we talk about politics and sports, and we know it's a lot of stuff going on in the community now, what are we talking about? Let's go with Randy first.
Well, I think that politics bleeds into every part of our culture and society. So it depends upon how we view what's being said and done. For instance, where we locate sports teams is an economic development and political decision. Who gets in this league? Let's not forget until 1947 when Jackie Robinson broke the color line. There weren't African Americans in Major League Sports, and what was the reason for that? It was politics.
Well, and you get deeper than that. For me, I used to be the voice of the Redskins here in North Carolina. The Washington Redskins, who were the last team to integrate. They were the team of the South. And now it's political because George Preston Marshall said he would never have an N-word playing on his team. And then we had Doug Williams be the first African-American quarterback to win the Super Bowl for said team.
Wow, so this thing goes back much farther than what's going on right now.
It goes back all the way to slavery when slaves were forced to fight in front of their masters. We all saw Django Unchained. That was just part of it. We were brought here to entertain and work the land, nothing more. So anytime we do anything with thought, we're thought of as somehow creating distinction or dysfunction in America.
Okay. Now, I did read somewhere that you had written an article, and
Sir.
you guys had pieces in it, and you stated that in less than 72 hours, NFL quarterback Colin went from a public enemy #1 to a universal hero, all because of President Donald Trump. Now, much of the world kneels with the unemployed African-American quarterback who chose to take a knee and fight the power instead of falsely paying homage to a song written by a slaver from Maryland. Now, this song was written by a slaver. What is in this song that has gotten people so worked up?
Well, it's not necessarily just about the song, although the fact that it was written by someone who was pro-slavery at the time in the context of his times is problematic. It's essentially the symbol of what's being asked. You know, from what I understand, Colin Kaepernick's protest is really focused on the fact that he's asked to stand at the time for the anthem, which, mind you, players weren't out there for anthems up until recently. We didn't always have full teams out on the field. So this is not something that's been since the beginning of the NFL, for example. And he's saying that given the context of our times, what's happening with people in their community, specifically African Americans being pulled over and shot by police, that he's not proud and he wants to bring focus to it. So first of all, he initially was sitting down. Mm-hmm. And when he was sitting down, people weren't talking about it as much. Then he was contacted by a veteran who respected his right to protest and explained to Colin that if he wanted to do this, that he would prefer that he would kneel and show respect for the flag, because when someone comes who served in the armed forces, like my father who was a decorated veteran, and you get the flag,
Sure.
people typically kneel when this person is buried. So the kneeling was not meant as a disrespect to the flag. It was meant, again, to draw attention to the idea that he's respecting the flag, but he's protesting and saying we need to pay attention in this country as to what's going on in our community, specifically with our African American men being shot. What do you think, James?
Well, I think this story, that op-ed piece, rather, that I wrote for the Carroll County Times and the Baltimore Sun, I believe this speaks to me. Francis Scott Key is from the same town I went to high school in.
Okay.
In the fourth paragraph of the Star Spangled Banner,
Right.
it talks about Maryland is not a place for the no freedom for slaves. We will catch you. That's essentially what the fourth paragraph says that we never get to. That said, again, down the street from my high school, that said, Colin Kaepernick taking a knee in football.
Mm-hmm.
I played football down the street from where Francis Scott Key was kidnapped by the British, and it's painful for me because I grew up in Upper Marlboro, Maryland.
Right. Okay.
And the police used to beat us up all the time. And that was not America to me. Today's kids get shot. And so that's what Colin Kaepernick was trying to explain or expose to America, that our lives matter and we're just not here to play football for y'all. Our minds matter. Mm-hmm. Just like Muhammad Ali, the greatest boxer of all time. Not there. Anybody, any police official, any military person, to say that Muhammad Ali was not the greatest boxer of all time, but yet he brought politics into sports in a way that it really confounded America for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And let's not forget that entertainers of all backgrounds, specifically African Americans, have stood up in the context of their time and protested. Louis Armstrong refused to go on a cultural mission to the Soviet Union, and as a representative of this great jazz musician, because of what was happening in Mississippi and Arkansas at the time in the late 50s, specifically when they wouldn't open up what happened in Little Rock. And he made some very choice comments and then refused, and people were angry toward him, but he was not going to go and represent the United States at a time when he felt that injustice was being done. So, again, he was a very famous and powerful celebrity, but he chose to tell the American government, "I am not going to take part in this mission." Mm-hmm. And he was saying at the time that I'm not just an entertainer.
Right. I'm a man and I'm a thinker. And I think as we go forward, that President Trump spent so much time talking about NFL players last week or 2 weeks ago instead of speaking about North Korea.
No, to cut you out. No, you did mention, I did read where you mentioned, you said in your article, you said from Charlottesville comments equating neo-terrorists to normal Americans, building a wall and stop illegal immigration, trying to shutter historically black colleges and universities. Now, President Trump, has he finally, you think he's finally gone too far? James, you wrote that?
I wrote that I think he did all that stuff that you mentioned just now, and nobody seemed to care. Now he's gone too far when he's told us to just shut up as African Americans, essentially, and we have not the First Amendment, the First Amendment, freedom of protest, and it's before the game starts, so you can't flag somebody before a game starts. I don't know if you ever played football before, but there are no penalties before the game starts.
Right. I mean, it really shines a light to me on this notion of what I had read in social media. That someone had written, "I'd rather deal with someone who burns the flag and wraps themselves in the Constitution than someone who wraps themselves in the flag and effectively burns the Constitution." And when our president wraps himself in the flag and he saber rattles to create cultural battles by essentially throwing red meat to the base, what he's doing is creating this, what I call contrived chaos, by pitting angry members of his base against what he is calling a pampered athlete. And why are they a pampered athlete? Because now the athletes are getting paid commensurate with what they're due based on the money coming in from television, etc. And they are not afraid like athletes were in the past. You know, when my grandfather played for the New York Giants, a lot of those guys in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s would have to have second jobs in the offseason. Now, a LeBron James is essentially a business unto himself where he has no fear. Or Stephon Curry, for example, where they're getting paid enough commensurate with their skills that they can actually say in real time to the President of the United States, "You're wrong." They can speak truth to power with no fear of reprisal, because if they were to lose their job, they're well paid. I think people should pay attention to the fact that LeBron James, whether or not I'm a Cavaliers fan or not, he sent out a tweet while this was going on that was more well received and retweeted than Trump's.
Well, I think President Trump doesn't necessarily understand racial dynamics in this country at all. And what he did was set a fire to the African American community. So when 2018 comes, the GOP has nobody to blame but him.
Right. Now, with this whole flag thing is going, is this the first time this has happened? You know, as far as people protesting, because I'm sure this is not the first time, because I read somewhere, actually I read an American track and field athletes, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, first and third place winners in the 200-meter race, protest with the Black Power salute as they stand in the winner's podium in the Summer Olympics game in Mexico City in October 19, 1968. Why is the Star Spangled Banner a part of sporting events anyway?
Well, first of all, this isn't the first time that athletes, or amateur athletes, as you pointed out at the time, have taken a stand. What's happened in the past, though, is that they've paid a price by not getting sponsorships or getting shunned or ostracized. When I mentioned previously about the economic power of the athlete now, they're not afraid anymore to speak up when they see wrong. And that is, I think, the difference now in changing the balance of power. James, what do you think?
Well, I think right now what we had the Jim Browns and Bobby Mitchells, to the Muhammad Alis in the 60s, to Tommy Smith and John Carlos in 1968.
Bill Russell.
Bill Russell. I mean, we can go on. But that Mexico City 1968 Olympics, when John Carlos and Tommy Smith put their fist in the air to talk about what's going on here in America, they had their medals taken away. You know, Harry Edwards, who's now a sociologist for the San Francisco 49ers, is the one actually he was the idea behind it.
So I think your question is, about the Star Spangled Banner being played at sporting events. I mean, if that, and your initial question is about politics and sports. So I'm going to go to that first question quickly.
Sure.
One of the blowback that you're getting is that people see sports or what we would call, sports and recreation as kind of a respite or a place to go that is away from, the politics that seem to infest everywhere else in society. But what I would posit is that you can't get away from it. It's just like saying, I want to go into an oxygen-free room. No, we need oxygen to breathe. I mean, politics is part of what our culture is. The question now is that it's become very divisive, and we're dealing in an era now with fake news, and what people don't know is what's true or not. We don't really have a media that's been dealing with, I guess, an objective truth. They deal with this idea of being fair and balanced. So we've been putting messages out for years of reporting both sides on an issue when obviously one side should not be getting the equivalent coverage. So I think what you're feeling is a lot of folks that go to these football games are white Americans, like what you saw at a Baltimore Ravens game when I saw the other week, and they were booing the players, the players on the team that were actually kneeling, and they're saying, keep this out of my experience. Well, if you're not going to protest and bring attention to this, where is the opportunity for these powerful men and women in other sports? Let's not forget the WNBA where people have stood up.
I was going to ask you what about the other sports?
Yeah,
right.
Where are you going to have people actually bring this up so that they pay attention to that? Where is that audience going to receive it? Because we're so sorted out now. People go to different churches. They live in different communities.
We're still separated, right?
Right. How are you going to assemble people to look at something so that they actually have a thought that says, why is Colin kneeling, or why are these players kneeling? Oh, there's a problem in our community. People are getting shot.
We're not minstrel show actors here. We're actual human beings. And what we bring into the stadium every day and what we take from the stadium every day is that we're still African Americans. Because name any player. If they weren't Steelers, if they weren't Ravens, if they weren't whatever, they're just in the same danger as I am leaving the studio.
Right. Now, Donald Trump made a comment. He did make a comment about that the teams and the coaches or the owners, they should fire these guys. You heard they should fire
that
those
was
guys.
the funniest thing.
And can the NFL, can they fire somebody for this? What do you think?
No, it's not in their contract. It's not in their clause. You have to have that clause. But if they did, the problem is that so many players would be upset that they would have me and Randy playing for the Carolina
So
Panthers.
basically, this is not going to happen.
It can't happen. You can't fire everybody.
Because we're talking about sponsors. We're talking about endorsements. We're talking about a lot of money.
Money.
And if the NFL goes on a strike, because now we got the Super Bowl coming up, and so what's going to happen at the Super Bowl?
Well,
how far is this going to go?
First of all, you bring up a very good point here about organization. We're in a right to work state in North Carolina, and the policy that's been pushed nationwide is to drive more of these states to become right to work, which essentially eliminates collective bargaining or the ability for people to come together and negotiate with the employer, whether it's a government employer or a private employer. So in a right to work state, you can just fire somebody. There doesn't have to be cause. They come in one day and you say, you're fired. And, of course, that's what the president got famous for on his reality show. Of course, that's television, folks. That's not real.
That's not real. That's right.
He presented this image of strength where he's firing people and he's coming in and adjudicating what's right and wrong, and he's getting rid of the folks on that program that are not doing the job. Well, in the case of the NFL players, even though many of them or most of them are multimillionaires based on their contract, except for the ones that are making the minimum, but a lot of them are making a very good salary, they're part of an organization, the Players Association, and they have a president and they have an executive staff, so they negotiate with the league on behalf of everybody, including, in some extent, former players that played.
Beyond that, it's hard to fire somebody you still owe money to get like guaranteed money they have now in the NFL, guaranteed contracts, guaranteed upfront money. So you can go ahead and fire me if you want to. I'm still taking on $12 million.
So he's just talking a bunch of air, basically.
But the best thing about the Trump thing to me
Sure.
is that he ruined the USFL back when I was a little kid. He brought in Herschel Walker before he went to the Dallas Cowboys, and then he sued the NFL for a monopoly. He won. The The USFL won, and they got, guess what?
$3.
I thought it was $1.
They got $1, and you get treble damages. In that
Yeah.
particular case.
Wow.
Yeah. And so he doesn't know the NFL, doesn't know sports, and he apparently doesn't know players.
But he wanted to own a team at the
this thing
time.
is a lot deeper. This thing goes way back. So, I mean, this has been going on for a while, what we're hearing.
Yeah, but I think what the key thing here is that we're getting to a point that we're going past kind of the Jordan mantra, which was Republicans buy shoes too. People used to ask Michael back in the day, why aren't you speaking truth? When you're seeing these injustices, and that was one of his replies. Of course, Michael has changed his view now too. When you read his comments publicly,
Who's talking about Michael
Jordan.
Michael Jordan. Okay.
Yes, when he was the king of the sports world and selling all those Nikes, and Spike Lee was shooting the commercials, he made that comment. And of course, now athletes don't have to make that comment. They can actually stand up.
They actually do stand up. And being the man who broke Michael Jordan's retirement, I have to say, knowing him personally, I was appalled every minute I saw him thinking about that.
Wow. Once again, listening audience, in case you're just joining into the show, we're in the studio today with Mr. Randy Voller and Mr. Jaymes Powell. And Jaymes Powell was the vice president of the African American Caucus of North Carolina's Democratic Party. And Randy Voller is the former North Carolina Democratic chairman and current leader of the state's Labor Caucus. And our conversation today is the government going too far with politics and sports? Do you think that from your point of view, do you think the players should be punished in any kind of way for kneeling?
For myself, no. I in high school, as a matter of fact, I didn't stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance, and I was threatened with suspension, but I didn't care. So that's just me personally. My First Amendment rights, the First Amendment, freedom of speech. That's the first one.
Okay.
I don't think they should be punished, but
in any kind of way, no salary, no punishing, no probation.
You can't get a penalty before a game.
Right. Okay.
I mean, when you consider all the kinds of off-the-field incidents that have happened in the aggregate over the last 30 years, guys actually standing up for something that's going on in society right now seems like something that's a good thing and starting a conversation.
It's definitely starting a conversation that America is scared to have. America is scared to have a racial conversation, deeply scared to have a racial conversation. When I look at the president talking about football, I think about the waggle pass. For all y'all St. Augustine's football lovers, CAA football lovers, the waggle pass is a play action pass where you come back around and you throw across the middle. Donald Trump doesn't know that. But what it is a diversion tactic. How come he's not talking about what's going on with Russian collusion? How come he's not talking about what's going on with North Korea? How come he's not talking about what's going on in Puerto Rico, at least in depth, in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which he refused to visit?
Well, I think the first thing that I think is most important is we had a significant catastrophic event that affected American citizens. Puerto Ricans are American citizens who actually most recently voted to become a state. Do you think they're going to be a state? No, because that gets down to racial politics too, because they'd get 2 U.S. senators, and by population, they'd probably pick up 4 congressional members. But the bottom line is we had a massive catastrophe, Irma followed by Maria, which leveled Puerto Rico, and that's where the president's attention should be. 3 million plus Americans. Okay, folks, that's a very large city if you wanted to add up in the aggregate. That's more people than live in the city of Raleigh, Greensboro, Winston-Salem, and Charlotte combined.
North Carolina, right?
And yet, and North Carolina has roughly 10 million people, yet he is not moving all the resources at God's speed to get there and help American citizens.
And when this comes out, we'll have another hurricane have hit New Orleans. So let's see how he handles that situation.
Mm-hmm.
But he is willing to, get into, kind of wade into cultural politics because he knows that this is the kind of stuff that gets people angry, that gets people lit up, and it gets people divided, and it distracts them from actually clearly thinking about what's going on. I mean, and I can understand, Gary and James, why veterans feel the way they do about the flag. When I was a little boy in Pittsburgh, we lived there, and my father, being a decorated vet, they were playing the national anthem, and I was about 10 years old, and I, like any little boy dealing with his father, I was giving him some lip or jumping around in my seat, and I wouldn't stand, and my father actually pulled me up and said, "Pay attention." And I put my hand across my chest and we sang it, because to him, as an immigrant to this country, who then did 44 combat missions and saw friends of his die, this was important. And I can understand that, but I can also understand the importance of expressing your First Amendment rights and shining a light to important issues that are affecting every single community in this country.
When my sister graduated from undergrad in Maryland at UMBC,
Sure.
with me in the stands were my Uncle Clarence Spencer Powell, who served in Vietnam. With me, behind me, was my great Uncle Joe, Joe Smith, who just died. With me was my brother Joey Smith, who is just retired from being a South Carolina state trooper. All of us played football. All of us. We come from a football family. None of us stood during the Pledge of Allegiance at my sister's graduation. They drove from South Carolina, Virginia, everywhere. But there's such a strong belief in my family that until we have equality for all, we don't have equality for any.
Now we're talking about the Pledge of Allegiance now. You said the Pledge of Allegiance, or we're talking about the national
Pledge of
anthem?
Allegiance, yes, the Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's another.
That's a different.
thing.
That's a different topic.
It's a different thing.
But
is there an issue with that too? The Pledge of Allegiance. Is there also
that only
an issue?
came around since about like Randy was born.
Okay.
Oh, and they also added words to the Pledge of Allegiance. I mean, I have a particular issue with this constant wrapping yourself in the flag, where everywhere we go, we're either doing the pledge and the anthem or both. I mean, if we are Americans and we care about each other in our communities, and we feel that strongly about the ties that bind, why are we constantly giving these pledges to this government? I mean, to me, it should just be self-evident, as it says in the founding documents.
It does, and I have to say this: one of the best driving to work covering the Baltimore Ravens years ago. One of the best sermons I heard on the radio was this pastor said, "Too many." It's from Howard University, actually. Too many pastors have wrapped themselves in the flag after 9/11. Too many pastors have wrapped themselves in the flag after 9/11. Have wrapped a cross in the flag after 9/11, and he said it was the cross that saved you from the flag. It was the cross that saved you from the flag. So you can wrap the cross in the flag all you want in America, but no, it was the cross that saved African Americans from the flag.
Now the flag. Speaking of that, we know the flag is government. Simulating war and all those type of things. Do you think that sports and politics, we're talking about that flag, do you think they should be separated?
Well, I mean, you can't separate it, because politics is everywhere. Like I said, just the political decision making about where franchises are located. Or how about this? They're able to operate outside of antitrust regulations so that they can control the number of people in their league, and they can keep competitive leagues out. James cited the USFL earlier. Even though the NFL, quote, lost the case, the damages were $1 times 3. So effectively, it's a cartel, and a cartel that's quite valuable. And the funding and the money is coming from the citizens in the community when you're building these stadiums, which is itself a political decision. I mean, you're giving tax breaks to millionaires, multimillionaires, and billionaires, where you might actually have other needs in the community.
Like infrastructure,
like schools, like clean water, like, for instance, Flint, Michigan. But that issue is everywhere.
Which is all surrounded, which is all government.
Right.
The thing that got me is I was going to write a piece on the Panthers, the Carolina Panthers wanting to expand their stadium that people pay for anywhere with PSLs. So I was going to write a story about it. So all of a sudden, I noticed all my journalism friends from the NFL coming into the General Assembly one day, because the GOP was pushing for more tax dollars to go to funding a new Bank of America stadium, which taxpayers pay for the first one. So that's politics involved in sports right there.
Right there. Those are political decisions. And then let's not forget what funds these leagues. It's basically sponsorship deals that are done with large multimedia companies. So, ESPN getting the rights to certain football games. ESPN is owned by Disney, a large, global corporation. And they buy it because they want to have the eyeballs that watch the game so that they can sell the ad revenue, and that revenue, that sponsorship, is what's put money across sports. It's what's made these franchises ridiculously valuable. If you look at the most recent sale of the Houston Rockets, I believe it's over $1 billion. When the Clippers were sold, Steve Ballmer paid over $2 billion, and what are they paying for? These are billionaires that want to be in a billionaires club, generally white men, but you do have some,
except for Michael Jordan.
You do have some, diverse ownership, but not much, and they've kept it a cartel, and now they've negotiated with other large corporations to pay these fees. And the only reason that the athletes are even paid, especially in basketball and football, these salaries they get, is because they've negotiated a percentage of revenue. So in basketball, I think it's somewhere between 50 and 53% that they're supposed to get of the revenue pie, and of course it's being divided amongst 12 to 15 players on a team. And that's why salaries in basketball have shot up, because the revenue has gone up and there's still a limited number of members. It's the same way in football.
So now speaking of money and the government, so the government, what I'm asking, the government does not the government does not pay money into NFL. Do they support any kind of funding?
No, I mean the only revenue would be.
And I'm asking that question because if they're supporting money into the NFL, then I could see why Donald Trump perhaps can comment. But if there's no money that the government is putting into the NFL, there's no.
Wait. Let's deal with the first question.
I agree with
there.
that.
I mean, Donald Trump is the president of this country. He can comment like anyone else under the First Amendment on anything he wants to. Of course, he's limited by certain things that he's supposed to keep classified. And maybe he's obeying that, and maybe he's not. But
time constraints. Maybe he's doing something else.
But the fact that he's actually wading into this dialogue. Don't forget that George W. Bush, who's a big baseball fan, got involved with steroids in baseball during his presidency. So,
I just want to piggyback on something you said earlier, talking about throwing red meat to his base. When you look at where Trump won now, if we're going to exclude the Russian collusion, I don't know if we can. But the states he won in, he threw red meat to his base, talking about these, like he said, overly pampered rich black guys, essentially. And so what you get is his base becoming disgruntled with those said players, because they don't make what Allen Iverson makes or Steph Curry makes or LeBron James makes, but yet they're forced to watch them.
I think that there's a danger, though, in the power of sports as it connects to the powers of states. I mean, the 1936 Olympics, when Hitler was attempting to show that Germany had been rebuilt and he was putting forth this new vision to the world, he was melding the power of the state with the power of sport. And when we have these professional franchises out here and people get behind their team, there is a certain level of boosterism or connection between the local community and their team, and that's kind of getting to your question about the role of government and sport. I mean, from an economic enterprise, it's travel and tourism dollars and bringing people into your community that they're spending in the community when these games are occurring, and that's the justification for investing in stadiums and keeping the team in a downtown, for instance, and not letting them vacate. But at the same time, it can be rather dangerous when you start putting in these concepts of the flag and the anthem, and are you a patriot or are you not a patriot, are you a good American or not? And would would President Trump have come out and made the comments he did, if the NFL and the NBA were 70 to 75% white? James?
I doubt it very seriously. I doubt it very seriously, and I think it really goes back to America's original sin of slavery. I'm gonna come take this country, I'm gonna make black folks work it because I'm too lazy. So again, if you don't like what black folks feel and what we like, then don't come to the games.
Now, Randy, you had mentioned in the article that bringing up Steph Curry's and LeBron James outrage, you said that Trump has showed us what he's made of. And not much of America is actually seeing it. What do you mean by he's actually showing us what he's made of?
Well, what I mean is that he particularly wants to animate his base because he feels that the attention and love from his base is what gives him the strength to continue in his job when his approval numbers are consistently, below 40, below 38%. But there's a certain percentage of the American electorate that are going to vote and support him, vote for him and support him no matter what he does. So this is a moment that he could have waded into and said, you know what, Colin Kaepernick, taking that knee, he's actually saying something about what's going on in America, what's been happening for years, and this is time for us to have a dialogue. But instead of doing that, he came out and he presented himself as a strong man. You're fired. And telling the owners that these people should be fired or intimidated for their behavior. This is a tried and true tactic from a strong man. Whether you're the president of a steel company trying to break the strikers back in the 1890s, or the head of a coal company, or a guy that runs a bunch of hotels. Let's not forget that Donald Trump imports a lot of his labor at Mar-a-Lago, right? He's not employing by and large U.S. citizens. He's bringing them in as guest workers. This is a man that does not respect the working men and women of this country, regardless of their racial background, regardless of their creed, and that he feels that it's important for him to show strength, and to him, strength is intimidation and dividing people. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is just a point of division. He did not come out and make a speech about healing, about kindness, about understanding, about bringing people together, about asking the fans that come to the games to actually think for a moment about what is going on here. For instance, what's going on that field is organized violence. It's gladiatorial sports. People are actually getting injured. There's something known as CTE that they're now acknowledging. They recently looked at Aaron Hernandez's brain, who committed who was convicted of those murders. This is the former New England Patriots tight end, in Massachusetts, and they found out he was suffering from CTE. These games have a price. Not everyone comes off the field unscathed. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, in that sense, it's no different than Roman times. And all Emperor Trump is doing here is more bread and more circuses. It's distraction. It's not meant to inform people and ask you to raise your consciousness about what it means to be an American.
Mm-hmm. James?
Oh, I concur with Randy on this one. He has to have the dumbing down of America in order to be even seen as an effective leader. My best friend in the whole world was just in a restaurant in a rural area, and he said a Trump family, 3 generations of them, were sitting next to him, and all they were talking about was this take a knee thing. And so he got to the point he couldn't take it anymore. And he said, "Did any of you ever play football?" They said no. He said, "Any of you ever been black before?" They said no. He said, "Don't tell me what I can and cannot do." And that's one of my caucus members, mm-hmm. Douglas Everett Payne. I'll say it.
Where do you guys see this whole thing going? I mean, from where it is now, with protests, with the flag, the kneeling, the whole thing. Where do you see this going within the next 3 or 4 months? What do you predict?
I predict not too much unless something else happens. I mean, unless another national incident. Las Vegas obviously has taken our attention away from that.
Now we know some players out there believe in Trump. Some don't. So what do you think is going to happen if a player on one team don't like what the other players doing as far as their beliefs? You think it's going to make the sports more violent from a gladiator's perspective, Randy?
Well, I mean, one of the critiques that Trump had, if you read his various tweets, was that he was questioning the manhood of today's NFL players. That's why I brought up this issue of gladiatorial sports, because he was talking about a time in the past, where people had their heads knocked off, metaphorically, right? And so I'd read some other commentary on that, like, how dare he weigh in? A man who's never played professional football. We don't know if he played high school football. But here he is, saying, hey, they're pampering and protecting the quarterback, and they're making it, the game is becoming weaker in some regards
less
as the athletes are
exciting.
getting bigger and stronger and faster, and they're capable of inflicting more damage.
He was talking about going to one padded practice per week, and usually it used to be 2. So they've cut it basically by 1. And so I'm telling you that padded practices and CTEs add up. You can look at Randy right now, look at above my left eye. That's a padded practice from Howard University. I'll have that for the rest of my life.
That's one of those scars that you.
Yeah, this is not
that you got.
Battle
crisscross.
scar.
This is not
That's
crisscross.
that's the real deal.
That's the
head.
real deal. That's my face hanging off.
So now Randy did mention that when you guys out there and you get hit and bumped a couple of times that you know at least some
I
damage.
might have
you know
CTEs,
you got
and I
some.
don't ask my wife. She'll probably say, "Yeah, I don't
They
know."
call it seeing stars, right? Like, you saw stars, and it's happened in all sports. It happens when you hit your head in a violent collision, whether you're playing basketball and a guy takes your legs out from under you and you hit your head on the deck.
It's not
happens
even
in baseball.
It doesn't even have to be your head. It could be a jolt. For
A
me,
jolt.
yeah, and I got hit a lot being jolted in the ribs. When I'm at the sideline, getting hit in the ribs, not in my head, but in the ribs. But that jolt.
I think
So I'm
that
gonna
hit
answer
actually made you smarter. Go ahead,
I'm
Randy.
going to answer your question. I mean, right now, all the focus is on Major League Baseball, which is close to me and my family. And you don't see people taking a knee in Major League Baseball, but, what's the big difference? The demographic makeup of Major League Baseball is different than the NBA and the NFL. So as you do have African-American players in the game and some incredible stars, but the numbers are very small. And so right now and the relationship between the national anthem and the game is a little bit different. But there have been some players who've taken knees. What I'd be curious about is on the greatest stage, will you see this happen in the division playoffs or World Series? At the same time, I think this is going to continue in the NFL, and as the NBA kicks off, I think you're going to hear more comments from the stars in the NBA. Let's not forget, the stars are kind of the leader of the league in the NBA, and when a Curry or a LeBron James or a Dwayne Wade or a Chris Paul, there's a long list, but starting with those 4, if they're or Kevin Durant, if they're saying, I don't want to go to the White House because I don't respect the president, as in what's happened with the Golden State Warriors, and they're saying that I'm displeased about the comments that I'm hearing out of the White House, that's going to continue to bring attention to this issue in all communities.
Now with sports, we know basketball, football, all of those both of those sports really deal heavily with African Americans. Now, as we move forward into this, 'cause you mentioned this may affect other sports. Do you think this situation will affect sports like golf, volleyball, other different sports?
You don't have.
Do you think?
Hopefully, but you don't have. Actually, I've never covered except one time a golf event. I don't know if they do national anthem. Before
Well, there's some other
golf
sports
event.
besides.
Well,
the ones
it's funny you bring up golf because they do some of these events like Ryder Cup and President's Cup, and last week the Americans had a huge victory in the President's Cup, but there was some embarrassment about it because when you inject nationalism, which is a part of Trump's platform, with sports, you start to get this kind of this hyperventilation about USA, 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 and there was some embarrassment about inebriated fans at the President's Cup and their comments and treatment of the foreigners. And it was, it's been in the media this last week, including the wife of one of the players from Australia who happened to be American. She was embarrassed for the Americans because of the kind of hectoring and the comments that were made. And so this is clearly what happens when you inject nationalism into sport, like the USA hockey team. We all got behind them in 1980. We're all proud. We're all excited. They're representing our country. But when you take that from the realm of amateurism to professional, and then you put it in each community, and then you put a flag around it, it gets rather dangerous.
I think you're absolutely right, because I think that this whole thing. So see, right now it's like the beginning. I see this, if it doesn't stop, it's going to trickle right down into high school sports. It's going to trickle right over. It's going to trickle right on over into other different sports as well, and it's going to continue.
Well, Gary,
So,
it has.
My nephew was told not to stand for the national
in high school football games.
In high school football.
Well, worse than that, during last year's presidential election, my Catholic high school in Lake County, Indiana, Gary, Indiana, one of their big rivals is Bishop Knoll, another Catholic school, and some students, these are young people, were holding up signs, I think at a basketball game, directed toward Hispanics. And we have a lot of Hispanics in my Catholic school, including in my graduating class, build the wall. Now, what is that all about? That's anti-immigrant. That's directed at Mexico. That's nativist rhetoric. And, of course, it created a big stir in the diocese, and it created, embarrassment for the school and embarrassment for the community. But this is getting to your question, politics and sports and the community coming together and people actually taking some of those slogans and applying them to the fans of the other team and to the players on the field. This has been happening in high school sports, by the way, for quite some time.
Well, like I said, in high school, I didn't stand up.
This is good information because a lot of my listeners, they don't know that this is not new. This has been going on. I think Trump, just being the president, just made it more visible. Well, he just came out with it and nailed it more publicly.
For me to put it in a nutshell, Theodore Roosevelt was a big racist, according to historian and writer Nell Irving Painter out of Princeton. And she talked about when he said Native Americans, he wasn't referring to what we call Native Americans. He called Native Americans white people. And so every other race that was here to sing and dance. And that's what Trump is essentially saying, that we're here to sing and dance and shut up. And that's all we're here to do, period. Sing, dance, or catch a football, dunk a basketball, and shut up. And
that's what I was saying. And so he's talking about he's really narrowing, he's targeting two type of sports right now, two type of sports. As we lead over into other sports, tennis, volleyball, all these things, my concern is, where is this going to be next year? Is this just going to spread and continue to go on to all of the sports? People are going to stand up and not stand up?
It's beyond sport. I mean, the notion of kneeling or not, or standing up or not, is really a function of whether you want to send a message to the community at large that I actually feel empathy or compassion with this, and that it's about bringing attention to something deleterious in our community, which is the shooting of people in our community. Essentially, mostly young African-American or young to middle-aged African-American men being shot.
Right,
and
but
that's what really starts this all.
That's what it is, but see what it's getting,
not
what it's
shot
getting to.
by other people in the community, shot by people in public safety.
And Gary, and I know, like I said, when I leave the studio, I'm going straight to Maryland. Now, pray for me. We got pulled over come back from Maryland for no reason whatsoever. Fortunately, my wife was driving, not me. If I had been driving, it would be a whole different story, perhaps. I don't know.
No, this you made a good point, Randy, about what this thing is all about. We comment that it is about the crimes, police brutality, and things of that nature. But what is being visible to the public is the Star Spangled Banner, the flag. So is something being hidden, or the real deal is all about what you just said?
Well, I mean, I'm going to connect it to another horrific event that just happened. We just had this horrible shooting, another in a long chain of shootings, that we've had in this country, all during the Obama presidency, the Bush presidency. It goes back. But this was a white male who's in his early 60s, who was an accountant, who, by all intents and purposes, had plenty of disposable income, wealth. He had no real reason to react this way toward his fellow human beings, and he did this. He planned this out and did this shooting. Now, had he been, Muslim, and which is a religion, he could have been a white man, but had he been somebody who was non-white doing this, do you think the narrative would have come out the way where they're all trying to say, oh no, this is a lone wolf, oh no, I'm not really sure why he did this, oh, he was a really wonderful guy, he said hi to me in the street, all of this litany of excuses about what drove this. But if you would change who that shooter was, James, what would have come out first?
I had this conversation yesterday. I went to my doctor's appointment, and he's a Muslim, and he said it would have been totally different, had the guy, he was praying it wasn't a Muslim who did it. And I was like, yeah, man, I was praying it wasn't a black guy who did it, and that's just America's. And we talked about how come this guy's being called a terrible attacker and gunman and whatever. How come he's not a terrorist?
Right. Now, when I first heard about it, somebody told me about it and said, did you hear about that? I wasn't sure whether it was black or white, but when I heard it was at a country concert. Now, it could happen at any concert, but when it happened at a country concert, and then I said, wow, a country concert this happened? Was the guy white or black? And then it was a white guy that did the shooting. It's this country is already divided by race, but it's something else going on. It's something else
fear
going.
retaliation.
It's fear of something. This
fear
whole
of
thing is
retaliation.
going in a whole different direction.
Well, fear could be one. It could be one of the key elements, but there's some form of ennui. There's some form of something that's in our spirit that's making people disconnect from the social contract, from the ties that bind, that make you feel part of something greater than yourself. So for him to do this shooting after he gambles for 8 hours and ostensibly sits down and eats, a steak dinner and whatever he did, it says a lot that here's someone that's willing to go up, hit a window, start sticking rifles out there and kill 59 Americans. And some can kill 59 human beings and injure well over 500. What would possess you to do this? This was not a political statement, mind you. This was just something that happened. And that, to me, speaks at a greater illness within our society, no less or no worse than an illness that allows police officers to pull over somebody and depending on who they are, decide to draw down and shoot them as opposed to treating them with kid gloves. Mm-hmm. And trying to get out of the interaction without violence.
Mm-hmm.
I completely concur with Randy on this one, former state chair. He knows a lot about this stuff, and I'm just saying, I know that when I drive around with a suit and tie on, I'm not really that concerned about getting pulled over. But when I have on just a T-shirt or something, man, I'm scared to death.
Let me ask you both of you gentlemen. Do you think we will ever overcome this blue, black, or red, blue? Do you think we will ever overcome this injustice?
No.
Ever?
No.
We've come a long way. I hear people say that we've come a long way. We got a long ways to go. Do you think we will ever overcome this? Even after we're dead and gone, do you think this would ever overcome?
My grandparents came here.
Because now in some other countries, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but in some other countries, I had spoken with some people that was from Egypt. And the lady had mentioned to me that on applications over in Egypt, it doesn't have anything about race on it. So they don't really care. But do you think in the future, 20, 30, 100 years from now, you think we will ever overcome this racial thing?
We've been in for 400 and some odd years. And the police have never been good. The paddy wagons, the paddy rollers, collecting African Americans. You look at the 60s. The fights my parents fought in the 60s. When I was growing up in high school in the 90s, the cops used to beat us up, not like Rodney King beat up, getting close to it. When I lived in New York, I got stopped and frisked. And so I'm looking at today, I look at Trayvon Martin. I listened to, I think it was Sean Hannity or Rush Limbaugh last night, saying that was justified yet again to shoot a child. So I don't see where this is going to change anytime soon, because the past is prologue. And so I don't think, if this doesn't change, it's going to be people in the police force fighting against people in the police force. This whole thing is going to turn into a war sooner or later.
I have hope that it could change, but it requires us to raise our level of consciousness, from the spirit inside outward, and kind of re-examine what it means to be human in our relationship to this biosphere and our fellow human beings. But to get there is going to require, an awful lot of work within communities and on this planet, and for people to actually give up something to get something. And in this case, the giving up is folks are going to have to give up the idea that in order for me to feel good about myself, somebody else has to be beneath me. And this is a money issue. This is an education issue. This is a racial issue. This is the issue of where I put myself in relationship to fellow human beings.
I think Randy's
That
totally
was a
correct.
wonderful
That
comment.
was a
That's
great
what this is
comment.
about. It's about money and race. Money has a lot to do with
In
this.
class.
Yes.
In
Yes.
class.
It does. Has a lot to do with this.
I mean, why is LeBron listened to? Because he's paid enough money now that he feels confident that he can tweet out and get 600,000 retweets. If LeBron James was getting paid $150 a week, nobody would care.
Right now, before we wrap the show up, gentlemen, I want to hear both of your final thoughts. We'll start with Mr. Powell.
I have to say that I think the president should have been talking about Charlottesville and the hate that hate made there instead of making more hatred, talking about Colin Kaepernick. The whole thing with Charlottesville is they want to preserve the way things were. They want to take us back. Reactionary. Colin Kaepernick represents us going forward, and that to me is where America is, and that's where we have to change.
Randy?
I'd have to say that I think that our president has not been leading with moral strength on these issues, and that he's just throwing red meat to his base in order to rile them up and create divisions within our society between what, in the NFL perspective here, what is generally a white viewing audience, and a percentage of that audience, support the president, and they voted for him, trying to get them riled up and feel anger against what he calls pampered athletes. But when the NFL is 75% African American, who is he really talking about here? He's trying to create this division, and he's doing it to distract people. And when you have the position he does, the bully pulpit as the president, and you can communicate with moral clarity to the citizens of our country, you want to be standing on the shoulders of giants here. And our president has essentially been a moral midget. He has not actually been a giant of a man. He's playing to the worst aspects of our people.
Like a moron, I believe Secretary Tillerson
I think
said.
Tillerson might have said that.
I didn't say it. Tillerson.
But I mean, he's playing for the worst in us instead of the best in us, Gary.
Wow. I can believe that. Okay, so once again, you're listening to Get With The Program Radio Show. Thank you for joining in with us today. Again, we had Mr. Randy Voller and Mr. Jaymes Powell, those two gentlemen, and we talked about the role and pretty much politics and sports, man. Should the government be involved with this? And I'm finding out, I'm hearing different sides of it. Some people out in the public say yes, some say no. But we'd like to hear your comments and your story. Once again, thank you for
I'd
joining.
just like to say, go
what you
to
got there?
Justine's University. Football.
Oh, okay. Okay. Now you, I'm gonna leave that alone right now. But yes, I agree. Hey, they doing the thing, man. And I hope that doesn't get this whole thing. I pray that this politics thing doesn't leak open to the HBCUs.
I hope it does.
But we have
I
to
mean,
we
I
have
hope
to
it does.
understand that
I mean, I don't mind it. I don't mind the kneeling and thing. I'm just saying I hope it doesn't get to a point that we're fighting.
your constitutional rights are different from, like, people saying pejoratively, politics. You have the right to speak out. You have 5 rights in the First Amendment alone.
Well, we got to wrap it up, gentlemen. Once again, thank you for listening to Get With The Program Radio Show. Stay tuned, stay smart, and once again,
Get with the program.
What you talking about?
The program. The program. Get with the program.
Everybody clap to this. Say what?
Get with the program.
It starts now.